all of whom had the same fatal disease called sleeping sickness. I had come here to Tambora for its parasites the way some people go to Tanzania for its lions or Komodo for its dragons. In New York, where I live, the word parasite doesn't mean much, or at least not much in particular. When I tell people there I was studying parasites, some would say, "You mean tapeworms?" And some would say, "You mean ex-wives?" The word is slippery. Even in scientific circles, its definition can slide around. It can mean anything that lives on or in another organism at the expense of that organism. That definition can include a cold virus or the bacteria that causes meningitis. But if you tell a friend with a cough that he's harboring parasites, he may think you mean that there's an alien sitting in his chest waiting to burst out and devour everything in sight. Parasites belong in nightmares, not in a doctor's office. And scientists themselves, for peculiar reasons of history, tend to use the word for everything that lives parasitically except bacteria and viruses. Even in that constrained definition, parasites are a vast menagerie. Justin, for example, was lying in his hospital bed on the verge of death because his body had become home to a parasite called a trypanosome. Trypanosomes are single-celled creatures, but they are far more closely related to us humans than to bacteria. They got into Justin's body when he was bitten by a tsetse fly. As the tsetse fly drank his blood, the trypanosomes poured in. They began to steal oxygen and glucose from Justin's blood, multiplied and eluded his immune system, invaded his organs, and even slipped into his brain. Sleeping sickness gets its name from the way trypanosomes disrupt people's brains, wrecking their biological clock and turning day to night. If Justin's mother hadn't brought him to the Tambora hospital, he would certainly have died in a matter of months. Sleeping sickness is a disease without pardon. When Mickey Richer had come to Tambora 4 years earlier, there were hardly any cases of sleeping sickness, and people generally thought of it as a disease that was fading into history. That wasn't always the case. For thousands of years, sleeping sickness has threatened people in the range of the tsetse fly, a wide swath of Africa south of the Sahara. A version of the disease also attacked cattle and kept vast regions of the continent free of domesticated animals. Even now, over 4.5 million square miles are off limits to cattle in Africa because of sleeping sickness. And even where people do raise cattle, 3 million die of sleeping sickness each year. When Europeans colonized Africa, they helped trigger giant epidemics by forcing people to stay and work in tsetse fly-infested places. In 1906, Winston Churchill, who was the colonial undersecretary at the time, told the House of Commons that one sleeping sickness epidemic had reduced the population of Uganda from 6.5 million to 2.5 million. By World War II, scientists had discovered that drugs effective against syphilis could also eradicate trypanosomes from the body. They were crude poisons, but they worked well enough to make the parasite sink back down to low levels if doctors carefully screened places thick with tsetse flies and treated the sick. There would always be sleeping sickness, but it would be an exception, not the rule. Campaigns against sleeping sickness during the 1950s and 1960s were so effective that scientists talked of eliminating the disease in a matter of years. But war, crumbling economies, and corrupt governments let sleeping sickness come back. In Sudan, the Civil War drove away Belgian and British doctors from Tambora County. They had been keeping a careful watch for outbreaks. Not far from Tambora, I visited an abandoned hospital that had had its own sleeping sickness ward. Now it was filled with wasps and lizards. As the years passed, Richer watched her load of sleeping sickness cases rise, first to 19, then to 87, then to hundreds. She ran a survey in 1997 and estimated from it that 20% of the people in Tambora County, 12,000 Sudanese, carried sleeping sickness. That year, Richer launched a counteroffensive, hoping to fight back the parasite at least in Tambora County. For people who were still in the early days of the disease, 10 days of injections in the buttocks with the drugs pentamidine was enough. For those like Justin, who had the parasites in their